And welcome. Hi, everybody. This is Creative Goo, and I'm your host, Harry. And I want to thank our sponsor, Gooey Cube, for making this possible. And wanted to let everybody know that I'm excited about today's topic. So, welcome, everybody. And I hope you're ready to have some fun and learn a little bit about how modeling works for 3D printing and any other questions you might have. And before we get started, I do want to talk a little bit about what's coming. So, future episodes will include the actual 3D printing process. I've been making some videos that I can share with everybody, as well as some other topics. I've got some guests that have asked to join us, and I will be scheduling time with them to join us for our hour or so and share their creative process and the creative things that they work on. So I'm really excited about that, and I hope all of you are too. And want to welcome Ransom Keys and Lady Hawk and everyone else that's joined us. So I will be monitoring chat. So if you have questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat so that I can make sure and answer them as we go. If you're looking for my sculpts and my 3D stuff, let's take a look at where you might find them. So let me shift my screen here. There we go. And this is my mini factory. This is my mini factory page, Harry's 3D Sculpting. Let me copy this location, drop it in chat. If I can get my mouse to work. And you can buy STLs here. This is the Tribes page, so you can subscribe. It's very much like a patron site. So for $1 a month or $3 a month, you get miniatures every month as STL files that you can download, and you get a discount on the store. And if we go to the store, you can see here's a lot of the models that are available for you to purchase if you're interested. So there's quite a bit on here. A significant number of these miniatures are inspired by the world of Zayate. So if you have pre-gen characters you use, NPCs, monsters from GUI's World of Zayate, you can find them here on this site. So, we can talk about Dr. Ransom Keys. So let me answer that question in just a second. Let me get this other location posted. So I do have a Facebook page that I run that's Harry's 3D Sculpting, same name. And you can go there or you can subscribe and you can see my progress. I do work in progress. I do all kinds of topics like that. Show people my work. I show the 3D printed models as well as the painted versions of my models. I sometimes show other people's models that I purchase and paint because I'm a hobbyist and love to share that stuff. So you can find that here. Hi, Blood Mist X. How's it going? So I'm going to have a special stream. I'm answering Dr. Ransom's Keys question, and he's asking for recommendations for a printer for someone new to 3D printing. And that's actually not as easy to answer as you might hope. It really depends on what you want to print, how much of a hobby you want this to be. 3D printing requires tweaking and tuning, all kinds of activities just to get to that model. And so I'm planning to have a session where I just talk about 3D printers, my experience with the brands and models that I've purchased, and answer questions specifically. There are other sites you can go to, and YouTube videos that talk about 3D printing, and they make all kinds of recommendations. If you see a printer that you're interested in or that you're curious about, you can ask me and I can go do some research as well so that you don't feel like you're on your own. and I'll schedule that session so that you could maybe look around. There's some really good brands out there. Some of them are more expensive than others, and there's printer types that give you different results. And I don't know that I want to go too much. If there's a lot of interest here on the streams, I will certainly answer more questions today, even as we go through this. I was hoping to spend some time talking about how to prepare your sculpt so that it can be 3D printed and a little bit of the pre-printing work you might do. But we can talk about 3D printers if that's what you guys are interested in. Let's see. I see Fantasy Grounds Academy. You're asking about painting services. There are a couple of people that on the GUI Cube Den of Enlightenment. It's basically the Facebook page that we have for GUI Cube. I can even jump to that real quick. So it's called the GUI Game Masters Den of Enlightenment. And there are people in there that are painters. So if you drop the question there, the other place you can go is our Discord. There's a GUI Cube Discord channel. You just look for GUI Cube. You'll find them in Discord. I don't have Discord up and running. It's a resource constraint when I'm using my streaming system. But anyway, you can go to Discord and ask there, or you can ask in fact. There's 3 or 4 people that are members of the community that do painting. I don't do painting commissions anymore. I don't even do sculpting commissions very often. I can't say that I never do them, but my services are not inexpensive. So if you want me to sculpt something for you, you really have to have some money available. It might be better just to find someone else to sculpt something for you. If your character exists in the world of Zayate, I often sculpt those because we make them for sale and we sell them. So you can keep that in mind. And I agree with Lady Hawk. There are some amazing painters in the community. Many of them take commissions and they make a little extra money doing that. It's just not something I can commit to because of my time constraints. So you might wait a really, really long time for something, and then that's actually not very good for you. And it's not very good for me mentally to have that weight on my shoulders to try and get that done for people when I have so many other commitments. So something like a stream, I don't have to do so much prep for because I have all this stuff preloaded really to talk through. So yeah, I can imagine. So what I'm seeing in chat is one of the people that have joined us today. It might become an NPC in the world of Zayate. I know that Alphinius Goo likes to get community members as NPCs, and we tell stories about them. So it can be a lot of fun. I have a couple of NPCs, and I also have my character, me, the art that was based on my face, as an NPC. So there's also some NPCs that I've submitted that are actually related to that character. So there's some storyline in the world of Zayate based on my character. So it can be a lot of fun. It really just depends on what you're looking for. So let's see. So if you can't find the GUI Game Masters Den of Enlightenment group, let us know and we can link that. Oh, I did put it into the chat. So that's really, really good. Okay, so I don't need this window anymore. So let's talk. Oh, let me bring up a different character here. I want to talk a little bit about the difference between sculpting modeling here in software versus what you're going to print on your printer. So most of the software was originally designed for gaming and movie making and things like that. And so they didn't have to worry so much about what would it look like if it was physically printed. And there's math involved that's used to reduce the processing power required for a video game or for um, a movie or special effects or TV commercials, all those kinds of things. And so here I have a model that I was playing with the other day, showing people how you can model. And I'll circle back to modeling techniques in my workflow and stuff in the future. But I wanted to take a step back because most of what I do is for printing. And so there's techniques that I use that other people don't. And there's techniques that I don't use that other people do just because it's purpose driven, right? So let's see if I can get my stylus ready so I can actually manipulate this screen a little bit better than with the mouse. So this is a 3D model, and oh, I've got a hat floating around. Let me get rid of that. Actually, that can help me. So if I was just going to send this, export this out so I could 3D print it, I would have two pieces. There would be this hat, and there would be this creepy crawly guy. Well, if that's what you wanted, that's great. But if you wanted the hat on top of his head, we have a problem. And so this illustrates some of the challenges you have if you're going to 3D print a model, is you have to pay attention to stuff like that. So let's say I move the hat. And, oh, I see what I did. And I move it. Okay, it's on the model's head. Oh, not quite. Now it's on his head, right? And then I send this out to print, and lo and behold, I still have two because I'm operating in 3 dimensions in the software too. The hat from this angle is in the right space. From this angle, it's not. So I need to move it on top of this model's head. Now we have a silly little bug that has a hat. All right. So you think I've solved the problem, but I haven't, because in this software, they're still different pieces. And if you look over here on the right, much like Photoshop has layers, modeling software has different, we call them subtools in ZBrush, but they're different models. And so there's different parts. So this file has 3 different pieces. If I export it, I get 3 different parts. That may not be what I want. If I do want it to be 3 different parts, that's fine, but you have to pay attention to stuff like that. And so I would need to make sure and merge them into a single model if I wanted to print this bug guy with the hat. So some other things you have to pay attention to is what I see on the screen is not necessarily what I'm going to print. And that has to do with that math I was talking about. So let's go to the bug dude. And I'm going to see, this is actually what the model looks like. Very simple, very blocky, because I was showing box modeling the other day. So every point on these rectangles and triangles and things is a point in space. So the software is tracking these locations. So that's not math, that's just location. And so then it fills when there's 4 contiguous dots, it fills that with a polygon. So a triangle, a square, whatever the different shape is between all those dots. And so you can see there's this purple color and this orange color just to show you where these are filled in so you get a model. And when I turn it off, you can see if I exported it, I would get this very blocky model. It would print successfully, but it isn't that smooth shape that we had a minute ago. And that's where the math comes in. So what the computer software does for everything from games to commercials to movies is use what are called subdivision levels. And what that does is it takes this box model and you'd multiply those squares by 4. And so you can see now I have a lot more of those polygons on this model. It's a lot smoother. Well, if I do it again, it's even smoother. I do it again, it's even smoother, which is wonderful. Now I have the creepy crawly model that I wanted. And it looks great on screen. And because I'm using the math to multiply, It works great for television, movies, etc. because it's processing power. Instead of having to keep track of 8,000 points, it's really only tracking 140 points, right? So you can see how that would add up really quick. And there's models I've made that have millions of points. Well, that's going to be too much. Well, the problem is if I try and export this, when I think it looks like this, won't work. I'm still going to get that smaller box model because that's the actual model. All right. So, and if there's questions, I'll keep looking, but I can see there's some discussion, which is great. I love the fact that you guys are just talking about the things that I'm trying to show here. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Now, I can manipulate the software so that it doesn't have those subdivisions and it's all geometry. And so that's one of the steps I go through before I move to printing a model, right? So that's just one thing to think about. The other thing I showed everybody the other day that I'll show again that's really important on the computer screen is I have this wonderful square, right? So it looks great on screen. I can model on it. Let me do that. Let me give it some more geometry so that you can see what I'm doing. Right? I should be able to print that. The problem is there's no other side, right? So on the computer, I can work in 2 dimensions. So if I lower and show you the points, there are 4 points that make up each square. In space, they're on a flat plane. So there's an X, Y, there's no Z, there's no thickness here. So this is not printable. It would be a division by 0, right? And if I try and drape this over my bug dude, same problem. Parts of the model will be solid, right? This guy here. But if I try to turn it into a cape, it would totally crash, division by 0, because while it looks cool, I can even do some fancy stuff here. Oh, well, let me, let's make it so I can do fancy stuff here. Ooh, now it looks like a cape. I love it. Right? But it's not printable. Even though it looks cool, that part of the model is only 2 dimension. There's no third dimension. And so I'd have to solve for that. I see a question. Precision creates structural weak points. When you're printing, you have to build supports. So because the printing technology isn't carving it, this isn't a CNC machine. This is additive manufacturing. So what it's doing is it's printing one layer at a time, either going up or building from the from the top down. But in all of those cases, if my arm is out like this, I don't know if you can see. Let me get rid of the screen and come back to me. So if my arm is out like this across the microphone, right, and I print, well, if I'm starting from my head, I can print Harry's head pretty well, but where's the arm going to print from, right? So between the build plate and my arm, there's empty space. And so that's what supports do is they support they basically print material up until it reaches the arm, and then it starts printing the arm, so it's supported. And I'll show you guys that. I showed it the other day, but there's going to be another session where I talk about creating supports and the supports you need for FDM type printers that are extruding plastic, or a resin printer that is sending light into the resin for it to react with. And I'll talk about those technologies too. So the more detailed your model and the more overhangs and and pieces that are stretched out, you'll need supports for that. If it's a very contiguous model, you may not need to support it at all. In fact, when I'm using FDM printers, I avoid supports almost at all costs because that plastic, once it cools, it's really difficult to remove the supports. And it's not a process that I'm very good at. I don't enjoy it. Where with resin printing, since I'm printing models like this, lots of supports, but I've got printers where the supports aren't so hard to get off and get to the printer model. But like I said, I'll show you that when we get to that section. There's so much to cover. I can talk about some of these topics, all day long. So back to this model. So what you have to do is make sure you have thickness. So one of the things that the software allows me to do is to give it thickness. And so now I have thickness. I can see parts on both sides. Now I can print it, right? Well, Harry's tricking you again. The problem's going to be you're printing this physical model and generally printing it small. But even if it wasn't small, this is very, very thin. So even if I was printing this life size, so the model bigger than my hand, the material that it would print that cape would be almost paper thin. So its thickness, but it's going to break and it's going to cause a print failure. That material might now get in the way of other parts of the print. That material may break off in the resin and float around, causing the entire print to fail. So the other thing you have to do is look at a model and is it printable, but also will it print well? And will it survive the process for you to use it for whatever purpose? And so I do have delicate models that I've made. I have a sword dancer and a spear dancer with ribbons, and they're balancing on the tips of swords, things like that. But they're designed to print successfully, but then be put on display. If you were gaming with it on a gaming table, it would break. I mean, it just would break. But they were both built to be art pieces. And so you do need to know the purpose. So if this was going to be the dreaded Gloomport spider beetle, I'm making this up, with the hat and the cape, you want to get some additional thickness here because I want to use it on the game table. So luckily I can adjust the thickness to whatever I need. Now it's super thick. And then it's about how's it going to look. And so the good news is, I've been doing this for a while, so I have an eye for what I need. But even without that, I can zoom out to about the size it would print, and that would look okay on the tabletop. Up close, it would look goofy because that cape is so straight. Um, but that might be what I want since it's a bug, right? Or I could turn it into wings and make two of them. So you can actually kind of get a feel for it when you're looking at it on screen based on how the size you want to do it. Hey, Feldari, welcome to the stream. I'm actually talking about making sure your model can be 3D printed. And so I'm going through some of the things you have to pay attention to when you're modeling so that it can be 3D printed. And so these are just examples. So if you have questions, you can drop them in the chat. I'll share, my answers with you. So let's see. I was going to show. I'll just do this one next. Turn off that. So I'm right now working on this Brontosaurus. Well, it looks pretty good already. I'm pretty excited with the form. I'm going to be making the tail turn and its head turn and things like that. I may actually put a saddle on him. I saw another company has these soldiers that put a platform on the back of dinosaurs and they fight. And so instead of buying that model for $300, I can model it for myself. So I'm working on it. But this leads to another problem. Let's say I was done and I was going to print it. Well, let me bring in something so I can show you. So let me add a person. Where'd he go? know where he is. Where is he hiding? Oh, there he is. He's really small. So let's just do, yeah, I'll make him a little bigger. So that's about the size of a person compared to, I looked it up. This is about the size of a person to a brontosaurus. All right. So he's about an inch tall. Well, I can print a lot of those on a printer. But if I leave this model this size, I think I have him too big. But let's say I'm going to print him and I need him to be, this is way too big. There we go. So he's supposed to be 200 millimeters long. But that means in the X direction or the Z direction, he's going to be 566 millimeters long. That's 56 centimeters. Well, if your printer can't print 56 centimeters, he's not printable. Even though he's a solid piece, he's super deep. Oh, I'll have to talk louder. That's me. I have this beautiful microphone, and for some reason, it doesn't always pick up my voice, and I haven't figured out why. So keep me posted and let me know if you can't hear me. I will try and not mumble and turn my head away. But anyway, this model is 55 centimeters in one direction. And if your printer can't handle that, you have to know. I mean, so you need to know the dimensions of the model. So even though everything else about this model is printable, in fact, it's a very simple model, it's too big. And so as the modeler, I might have to cut it into pieces. It's very doable. Software makes that easy. I can even register it so that there's a peg on one side and a hole on the other. But you have to know before you export it. Otherwise, you end up with an unprintable STL file because it's too big for most people's printers. Now, there are bigger printers now that might be able to print it. You just have to know the printer you have. And most of us that sell STL files know that most people don't have big printers. They have smaller printers. And so you just have to be aware of what the most common sizes are so you can cut it up for those people. So that's the main reason I wanted to show the Brontosaurus, because it's not even ready to be a real model yet. Let's see. So this is a model that I did. I did a polar bear. He's a character in Zayate. He's the animal companion of a Dwarven Ranger, but he was just on his all fours, really boring. So I modeled him in this, more active position, and I really like how he turned out. As I mentioned in another one, I have this little silhouette you can see. So from the front and from the side, the silhouette's really strong. So I like it. And I've already did some things that you would do just for 3D printing. And so I did want to show you guys that. So you can see he has, he's growling and he's got these teeth that you can see. Well, if you notice, I didn't open his mouth and make it empty on the inside. So if I hide the teeth, I left material on the inside. It'll make it easier to print instead of having the printer try and build supports inside where you're not really going to see anyway. And you're going to paint it in such a way to highlight the teeth. I just left it this way so the teeth will print successfully, and then you would just paint darker inside, and then you'd highlight the teeth, and the model's going to be much simpler for a painter to deal with than trying to figure out how to get inside. Or if there were supports in there, how am I going to remove all those supports through the teeth? Um, but yeah, he was a lot of fun. Appreciate the kind comment. So he's going to be available on my mini factory. Um, the other thing that I pay attention to, because I paint these and I put them on the game table. He's pretty forward balanced, or unbalanced, I should say. So there's no way he could freestand. Most of my models are freestanding, so even without a base, you can stand up a character and they're balanced. I take personal pride in that. He is not, and so you're going to have to, um, once he's printed, drill holes in his feet to mount him to a base for him to be the most stable, because he's going to be heavy in the front. You might even have to put a washer underneath the base so that he doesn't overspill a base if the base isn't big enough to hold the whole model. So things to keep in mind again when you're modeling for 3D printing. This is going to be a physical model. And what I might do is give him a base that you print with him that he kind of plugs into to make sure he's balanced. And so those kinds of things you want to be paying attention to as a modeler like me before you just send this out into the world. The other thing you might have noticed is his teeth are a separate piece. And so, because his teeth are a separate piece, I have to make sure before I send him to an STL file that I merge the teeth with the rest of the model. All right. Oh, interesting that you say that. I was having some fun. Um, let's see. I have another version of this character, and here he is with the character Tiak. And again, the silhouette's pretty neat from the side. Tiak is short; he's a dwarf, and from the front, it looks really, really good. So, if I render this real quick with shadows and everything, that looks pretty neat. And in fact, let me turn on perspective and to floor and really get the effect going here. So yeah, I was pretty happy. It looks really good. All right, so um, those are the basics. Now I'm going to get into a little bit of an advanced discussion, and then we can answer people's questions. So, um, for those of you that are part of the GUI community, I just sculpted this character last week as a character in honor of a person. So, if this might be a little emotional for some people, but this is a preview of a model I've done for a real person. His name's David. This is his NPC. He's going to be in Zayate, and he's a rogue. And it's based on an illustration that was done of David a few years ago. But I had a whole bunch of fun sculpting him. He was really cool. And you can see him from my angles. He's got this short cape. He's got a sheath for his nasty short sword, and he's dressed for combat. He's got his shuriken across the front. Everything looks really good. Now, he can't be printed right now. Even though it looks solid, he's not. And even though I've done some things that you might not think about, um, let me do this and then pick his cape so I can show you better. All right, so this is his cape. Looks pretty neat. And what I did was I pulled the cape flush with his back so that it's one piece. So when it's printed, the cape is not separated from his back, which once again is a problem because there's going to either be material in there or supports, or the cape breaks off. And so those are things you have to do. I may have to also increase the thickness, but I think because I've got it so close to his back, it shouldn't be a problem. But those are things you have to pay attention to. And then there's some other things, of course, there's all kinds of different pieces. So if I hit this button, you can see these are all the parts. Well, if I print this, that's just going to be a mess. It's just going to be a mess. And so I have to merge all those together. And so it's really important that you know that. But the other thing, because it's all those parts, I need to look at each one individually to see how it's going to function. Um, so that's what I'll do before I print. So I've got this guy right here. Well, I'll have a problem. Let me solo him again, but turn off. In addition to him having no head, his head's actually one of the other pieces. There's a hole here where his head used to be, right? That you can't have any holes in a model because what would there's no thickness. It actually effectively creates a 2D model because on the inside it's empty. There's just nothing there. And so I need to solve that problem. So there's techniques I can use when I'm modeling to do that. And then what I've done is I've made copies of the model where this one I've already closed off the neck, the legs, and things like that. Oh, I don't want to model on him, right? And then I have another one that's just his waist that I've turned into his, rogue like trousers, right? So, um, again, this one's in pretty good shape. Then I have the belt, and again, you do things for 3D printing that might be different than what you would do for a model you're doing for a game or something. So number one, this belt is super thick. Well, wouldn't that might be a problem if you're doing a movie or television show, but because this is going to become one contiguous piece that's printed, I want beforehand the belt to dig into the body so when I make it one piece, there's no gaps. Again, if there's a gap, that's a problem. So let's say I'm going to make a change that I don't want to, but let's say the belt's like this and there's a gap between his skin and the belt. The printer's going to try and print that and deal with that gap, and it'll fail, right? Either that piece will break off, something like that. So I make it extra thick for that reason. What's next? Belt buckle looks like it's in good shape. Bracers looking pretty good. I actually made the bracers separately and brought them in, so this design and the buckles made it. I've already made it into one piece. So and then I duplicated it to make the bracers on each side so that they match. Um, so here's another thing you might need to deal with. He's got boots, right? Well, if I make that boot make one of the boots go away, there's a foot underneath. Well, I have to make sure. It's a good screen when you hear roguelike trousers. I like it. So anyway, there's a foot underneath, and so you have to decide whether any of that foot's showing or not. And if it's not going to show, maybe you don't even include that part of the model. So I have a version where there's no feet. So when I merge the model into a single piece, there's less calculations required. The other thing that you could do that can be a challenge is if I made the boots to actually fit on the feet, it'll actually try and print the feet and the boot. That can be a problem. And I've had models do that where it actually disintegrates later because it's actually two pieces, even though it looked like one. So the things you learn when you're modeling for 3D printing, to avoid those kinds of challenges. Um, let's see what's after the boots. Oh, I did the shoulder piece, and so it's multiple pieces. So I have to make sure I get the shoulder going. Yes, that's right. I had to make sure there was nothing in Alphinius's head when I printed it. That's absolutely true. You can. That's a fact that you can keep. You can take that to the bank. All right. So then the face. Let me get rid of the cape. Where did the cape go? It's not going to work if I can't find the cape. There it is. All right. So you can see his head. But there's some things that you want, especially since this is going to be a 1 inch tall miniature, you have to be super careful with things like the face. So there's eyebrows here. Now, a lot of times you can just do a line since it's a 1 inch tall miniature. That means the head's only going to be um, what an eighth or no 3/8 of an inch. It's very very small, right? So it's like 8 heads tall. So You don't need detailed eyebrows, for example. I like to put them in there because my printers are actually good enough to put some texture there, so you could paint it and be able to for the brush to catch it. But it's that same challenge. You want to make sure you get in really, really close. That that the eyebrow. Let me select it, and that the eyebrow's not pulled away. Like if it's pulled away again from the face, that's just not going to print. It's going to cause all kinds of problems. And so you want to take the time to make sure everything's looking good, but also that it's printable. And you can see underneath the mustache here, I probably have a problem. So I'm going to have to go through and fix that. His mustache is pulled away from the face, and that would be a problem because it's so small you might not notice, but a really good printer will actually print that piece, and then it'll break off, and it might be floating around in your resin and then cause problems later. I mean, those are things you don't want. So I'm going to mess with this later so I can print him. um, but those are things you need to look for. I'll probably thicken it up on the inside, but those are the face things. And like you can see, I actually have eyes where he's looking at an angle. I did that because I made it a render too, so you can see him before he's printed, right? Um, but that's the process for going through it. And then once I've gone through every single piece of the model, then I run the process to merge it into a single model. And there's different techniques to do that. The good news is ZBrush has made it easier for those of us that 3D print. So there's some techniques that they've built into the software to make that part easier. So but I still go through. I want to make sure it's working. So great question, Dr. Ransom Keys. The question was, can you modify a model to remove those superfine details if your printer can't handle it? Well, the good news is you don't have to, because if the printer can't handle it, it won't print it, right? So as long as it's a solid, continuous model, it'll just print, and those eyebrows won't even show up because it can't print it. And so what the best way to, I don't have them handy, I can do it in a future stream, is show printed large where you can see all the details, printed small where you don't, but I can use the same model to print both, and it'll just, where it can't do the details, it just doesn't even try. um, and some other things you have to pay attention to: this weapon is sticking out straight, and so it looks a little bit chonky. Another word for you to use, and it's probably going to print really, really fragile, but I don't want to make it too chunky, just a personal preference. And so that can break off. And it's just a design choice I make. If you've ever seen Games Workshop models, they are super chunky. And that's because they sell to, honestly, to young boys, right? So 8 to 14, I think, is the target audience. Not because they want the boys to buy that stuff, they want their parents to buy it because their parents actually have to, their parents have the money, right? Not to talk about Games Workshop business model too much, but that's why. And so their models, they say, not for small children, but the parts are actually really big. The hands on a goblin are ginormous. Hands on older humans were ginormous too. But that's because um, the models need to be handled by small hands and be able to stand on the tabletop through a lot of games and not break. They do have more fragile models for modelers and things like that for people that are experts, but the basic models that sell the most are very solid, not a lot of outstretched arms with a fragile rapier. It just doesn't happen. And so I have to be careful of that too. And that's one of the reasons the cloaks were so thick in all those models, is so that they didn't break and they weren't fragile. So more aggressive companies that would make them more true to scale and things like that, you had to find materials that could handle that really thin cloak or that really fragile sword. And that's one of the reasons that softer plastic exists, is so you can do that. The lessons you learn when you get into 3D printing and mold making. I used to do molds too when I was sculpting. I'm going to show everybody sculpting in Putty. I have to get my camera set up for my phone so I can show you guys what it's like to sculpt in Putty. Um, uh, Two-part epoxy resin most of the time, and so you can see what that's like, and the different things you have to account for when you're sculpting a physical model versus sculpting a digital one. So he's close. I mean, the artwork's done, the model's complete. I just have to go through and make sure each piece can be merged into a single model. Then I'll do a test print, make any adjustments I need, and then do a final print. And then I'll be printing this out for a special group of family members for this model. I've done memorial models before, and I don't sell them. I just make them available to the family members and close friends, so that they have the memorial. Um, if if the family wants to sell them, I certainly will be willing to. But that's not the concept here. All right. Any questions? So crayons, great question, Randy. So I will have illustration concepts and art. I do illustrations too, not as much as I used to, but we can certainly have guests come in and we can do a crayon competition and see who does the best version of Alphinius goo and crayon or something like that. I love that idea, but we'll have to see how that goes. Um, an anti-Alphinius protester. Well, I would need something to go on, either some, Google searches for, something or a character photograph, an illustration. I prefer to use reference models if I'm doing something like that. But having somebody holding a sign would not be difficult at all. I made signs for conventions for GUI cubes. So we print out a GUI cube, and then we slide in a sign, and it says GUI cube or table number 4 or whatever. And so that's certainly doable for sure. Okay. The other thing to be aware of. Let me see if I have a model. So I'm going to be somewhat quiet as I'm looking for a file on my computer. Give me a moment. So what I'm going to show you guys is another piece of software I use. It's called Mesh Mixer. You can use it to manipulate STL files and do some 3D modeling. I use it because it can check the integrity of my model. So no matter how good I do a job in ZBrush, there are going to still be problems potentially. Sometimes it works great, the magic works, and I can just print it. Most of the time, however, there's still problems with the model, and Mesh Mixer finds them for me. So let me go to where I was just at. So I finished sculpting. I've exported the STL from ZBrush, and then I bring it into Mesh Mixer, and it has these wonderful analysis tools. Now, there's no problem with this model, so it doesn't show, but it'll actually show all the problems with this model, and I can correct them here in Mesh Mixer sometimes. And if not, I have to go back and rework it in ZBrush, export it again, and use Mesh Mixer as a checker. And then once I've solved it, I can then re-export it as an STL in printable mode. And so if you can get Mesh Mixer, I do recommend it. I don't have a file that's messed up, I don't think, because I've already fixed most of these. So I can maybe show you after we get David done. Maybe in a future episode, I'll save a version of David where it had the problems. And that might be exactly what we want to do. Let's see if this model's been fixed yet or not. Should look familiar to people. Nope, it's not finding. I've already fixed it. So, but this is what Mesh Mixer, that's what I use it for. People have other uses for it, but I repair my models, my STL files using um, this software. And it really has made my life better, because if you bring it into the printing software and it doesn't work, there's nothing you can do, because that's not what those software are for. That software is designed for making it a file that you can use directly on the printer. So we'll talk about that software as well. So Mesh Mixer is software that I recommend for doing those repairs. But I've already repaired all the files I have. So I'll have to make a messed up file and show you how we can fix it. And sometimes it can't fix it, and so I have to go back and change something in ZBrush, export it again. All right. So those are some things you have to keep in mind when you're modeling. And sometimes when you get an STL file from someone else, they haven't optimized it. They haven't used a tool like Mesh Mixer, and that might be why you're having problems. So checking someone else's file if it's not printing successfully is one step. The printers themselves and getting it tweaked and the support's done right is the most likely problem. And we'll talk about that when we talk specifically about 3D printing. Any last questions for today? All right. So I don't see any more questions. Again, every Thursday night, we will have this session. Starts about 6 p.m. Pacific time. Future topics are going to be 3D printing. We'll talk about supports. We'll talk about the printers themselves, things that you want to deal with. I'm an expert on the printers I own, so I'll talk about those specifically. But there's definitely some general guidance I can provide. And then I have some guests I'm working on to bring on and have them talk about their art, what they do, and it'll be all about them. I will try and do as little talking as possible, unless it's in the form of a question. And that's all coming over the next few weeks. And I do plan on talking more about my modeling process, but I'm also going to talk about modeling for illustration and some illustration software that I use for, when I'm in the mood for that. And I'm not the best illustrator in the world. In fact, I would be considered a rank amateur, but I do it for fun. And it's a very different experience. But I'll certainly share that. And then, like I said, when I get my camera set up, I'll do some physical sculpting, and I can provide some tips on painting miniatures for those of you that are interested. So we're going to be all over the place with Creative Goo. That's the point. It's all things creative and tabletop gaming. So, Way and Fair Products, I need some inspiration, Doc. And so if you can give me some inspirations for products, what I mostly do is more hats for Alphinius Goo, but some other ideas would be welcome. Okay, I think I'm going to wrap for today. Thank you all so much for being here. And I look forward to chatting with you guys again next week. And you guys have a great day. great weekend. And don't forget, Saturday is Goo Morning Zayate, and Alphinius and Mandy put on a great show. Love to have you join us there too. And take care, everybody.